The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the dirt road into a river of mud. 18-year-old Mason Clark stood at the edge of the Holloway Ranch, soaked to the bone, his backpack heavy with everything he owned. His phone had died hours ago. His car had broken down 20 miles back. He'd been walking ever since. The barn loomed ahead, its red paint faded but sturdy. A single light burned in the main house beyond it, warm and golden against the storm. Mason's hands shook as he pushed, wet hair from his eyes. He'd never asked strangers for help before, but tonight he had no choice. The thunder rolled across the Montana sky, and Mason felt smaller than he ever had in his life. At 18, he should have been planning college. Should have been home with his family, surrounded by warmth and love. Instead, he was alone. 3 months. That's how long it had been since his parents had told him to leave. Since his father had looked at him with disgust and said, "Not under my roof." Mason had packed a bag that night, had left with $300 and a broken heart. Now he had $50 left, a car that wouldn't start, and nowhere else to go. 30-4-year-old ranch owner Ethan Holloway stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the storm roll across his land. He loved nights like this. The rain cleansing the earth, the quiet, the solitude. It had been 3 years since he'd buried his Uncle Robert. 3 years of running this ranch alone, keeping his head down, keeping to himself. It was easier that way. Then he saw the figure stumbling toward his barn. Ethan's jaw tightened. He set down his mug and grabbed his jacket. Trespassers weren't common out here, but they weren't unheard of either. He'd had enough trouble with drifters, stealing tools and leaving gates open last summer. He pulled on his boots and headed out into the rain. His border collie blew at his heels. The wind whipped at his jacket as he crossed the yard. The barn doors rattled in their frames, and there, pressed against the wood, trying to shield himself from the downpour, was a kid, not a man. A kid. Mason reached for the barn door handle, just as it swung open. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted by the dim light inside. His cowboy hat shadowed his face, but Mason could feel the weight of his stare. A dog stood beside him, watching intently. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice low and cautious. Mason's throat tightened. Water dripped from his hair, his clothes pooling at his feet. I'm sorry. My car broke down. I've been walking for hours. Can I sleep in your barn?" "Just for tonight. I'll be gone by morning. I promise I won't take anything. I just need somewhere dry." The cowboy didn't move. His eyes even in the shadows. Mason could see they were blue-swept over him, assessing. "You alone?" "Yes, sir. Where's your car?" "About 20 miles back on Route 89. It just died. And my phone's dead, too." Long silence stretched between them, broken only by the drumming rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The dog whined softly. Then the man stepped aside. "No." Mason's heart sank. He'd been refused before. He should have expected it. But before he could turn away, the cowboy added, "You're not sleeping in the barn. Come inside." Mason hesitated at the threshold of the main house, dripping water onto the porch. The cowboy Ethan, he'd said his name, was stood in the doorway, waiting. He'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. His face was weathered but kind, lines carved around his eyes and mouth. "I don't want to make a mess," Mason said softly. Ethan's expression softened just slightly. "You're already soaked. A little more water won't hurt. Get in here before you catch pneumonia." Mason stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the warmth and light. The house was simple, but lived in. Wooden floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. A stone fireplace, crackling with flames. Worn leather furniture that looked like it had been there for generations. Photos lined the mantel horses, landscapes. A younger Ethan with an older man who shared his eyes and smile. A guitar rested in the corner. Books lined built-in shelves. A pair of worn boots sat by the door. It felt like a home, a real home. Mason's chest tightened. Bathrooms. By through set pointing. There's towels in the cabinet. I'll find you something dry to wear. Thank you, Mason whispered, his voice breaking slightly. I really appreciate this. I won't be any trouble. Ethan nodded once, his gaze lingering on Mason's face for just a moment longer than necessary. Something flickered in those blue eyes, recognition, maybe, or understanding. Then he turned away, calling for Blue to follow. Mason stood under the hot shower, letting the water wash away the cold and exhaustion. His body ached. His feet were covered in blisters. His shoulders burned from carrying his heavy backpack mile after mile. But more than the physical pain, it was the emotional exhaustion that threatened to drown him. He was so tired of running, so tired of being alone. He didn't know why Ethan had let him inside. Didn't know why a complete stranger would show him this kind of kindness. But he was grateful, so impossibly grateful. When he finally stepped out, wrapped in a towel, found clothes folded neatly on the bathroom counter. A flannel shirt, soft and worn, sweatpants with a drawstring waist, thick wool socks. They smelled like cedar and wood smoke and something warm. Like home, Mason dressed quickly, rolling up the sleeves of the shirt. It was too big on his slender frame, but it was dry and warm, and that was all that mattered. He padded back to the living room. His bare feet silent on the wooden floors, Ethan sat by the fire, 2 mugs of tea on the coffee table. He'd changed too, now wearing a Henley and jeans. His hair was damp, pushed back from his face. He glanced up when Mason entered, and something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something softer, more complex. Sit, Ethan said, gesturing to the chair across from him. You look half dead. Mason sank into the chair, accepting the tea gratefully. The mug warmed his hands. I feel half dead. Where were you headed? West. Just anywhere west. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's not much of a plan, it's all I've got. Running from something? Mason's grip tightened on the mug. He stared into the amber liquid, watching the steam rise. Running toward something, I hope? Ethan didn't press. He understood evasion when he heard it. Blue padded over and rested his head on Mason's knee. Mason smiled, scratching behind the dog's ears. He likes you, Ethan observed. He doesn't usually take 2 strangers. I like dogs. Always wanted one growing up, but my dad was allergic. Or so he said. Mason's voice held a note of bitterness. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The fire crackling between them, Ethan studied the young man across from him. 18, maybe 19 at most. Dark hair that curled when wet, green eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. High cheekbones, a delicate jaw. Hands that looked like they'd done hard work despite his youth. He reminded Ethan of someone. Of himself, maybe a long time ago. You got a name? Ethan asked. Mason? Mason Clark? Mason? Ethan nodded. I'm Ethan Holloway. I know. You said, Mason offered a small smile. This is your ranch? It is now. My uncle used to run this place. Uncle Robert. He passed 3 years ago. Left it to me. I'm sorry for your loss. Ethan shrugged, though the grief still sat heavy in his chest. He lived a good life. Taught me everything I know about ranching. About horses. About... He paused. About a lot of things. Mason heard the weight in those words. The unspoken stories. The layers of meaning. What about you? Ethan asked. You got family? Mason's expression shuddered like blinds slamming closed. Not anymore. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Ethan recognized that tone. That wall. He'd used it himself once upon a time. You could stay the night, he said instead, changing the subject. There's a guest room upstairs. But come morning, I need to know your plan. You can't have you wandering off without some kind of direction. I'll figure something out, Mason said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I always do. There was something in the way he said it, a weariness, a resignation that made Ethan's chest tighten. How long have you been on the road? 3 months. Give or take, and before that? Mason's jaw clenched. Before that, I had a home, a family, a future planned out. And then I didn't. Ethan wanted to ask more, wanted to understand, but he could see the pain etched in every line of Mason's face. Well, he said gently, tonight you've got a roof over your head and a warm bed. That's something. Mason looked up and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Yeah, that's something. That night, Mason lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling. The room was simple but clean. A quilt his grandmother might have made, all blues and greens in a wedding ring pattern. A window overlooking dark fields stretching toward distant mountains. The distant sound of horses shifting in the barn, their soft whinnies carrying on the wind. The rain had stopped. Stars peeked through breaking clouds. He should have felt like a stranger here, an intruder, but instead he felt safe. For the first time in 3 months, he felt safe. Mason rolled onto his side, pulling the quilt up to his chin. It smelled like lavender and sunshine, like someone had cared enough to keep it fresh. His mind drifted to Ethan, to the way the rancher had looked at him. Not with pity, but with something else. Understanding. Maybe recognition. To the way Ethan had refused to let him sleep in the barn, most people would have said yes. Would have been relieved to keep a stranger at arm's length, but Ethan had brought him inside. Had given him warmth and safety and kindness. Mason didn't understand it, but he was grateful. Downstairs, Ethan sat by the dying fire, his mind restless. Blue lay at his feet, snoring softly. Ethan stared at the flames, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Thinking about the kid upstairs, he'd turned people away before, told them to move along, pointed them toward the nearest town. It was easier that way, safer. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems only led to heartache. But when he'd seen Mason standing there in the rain, something in him had cracked open. Maybe it was the desperation in those green eyes. The way Mason had asked so quietly, so politely, like he expected to be refused and was already preparing himself for rejection. Or maybe it was the way. Ethan saw himself reflected there. A kid who'd left home at 19 with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart, who'd arrived at this very ranch, desperate and lost, and had been shown kindness by a man who didn't have to care but did anyway. Uncle Robert had taken Ethan in, had given him work, purpose, a place to heal, had taught him that sometimes the best thing you could do was extend a hand to someone who needed it. Ethan had refused to let Mason sleep in the barn because he remembered what it felt like to be alone in the dark, to feel invisible, disposable, and he couldn't do that to someone else, especially not a kid who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Ethan took a sip of whiskey, the burn familiar and grounding. Tomorrow, he'd figure out what to do, how to help Mason get his car fixed, get back on the road. But tonight, he'd given him shelter, warmth, safety, and somehow, that felt like the most important thing he'd done in a long time. Morning broke soft and golden across the ranch. Mason woke to the smell of coffee, bacon, sunlight streaming through the window in bars of dusty gold. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then it all came back. The rain, the walk, the cowboy who'd let him inside. He dressed quickly in his own clothes, now dry and folded at the foot of the bed. Someone had washed them. Ethan, presumably. The kindness of it made Mason's throat tight. He headed downstairs. Following the sounds and smells of breakfast, Ethan stood at the stove, flipping eggs in a cast iron skillet. He'd showered and changed, his dark hair still damp, combed back from his face. He wore a faded denim shirt, rolled up to his elbows, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. He looked younger in the morning light, handsome in a rugged, quiet way that made Mason's heart skip. "Morning," Ethan said without turning around. "Hope you're hungry." "Starving," Mason admitted, sliding into a chair at the kitchen table. The table was set for two. Coffee steamed in mugs. Orange juice sat in a glass pitcher. Toast, bacon, eggs, and hash browns filled plates. It was more food than Mason had seen in weeks. "You didn't have to do all this," Mason said softly. Ethan turned, spatula in hand, and met his eyes. "You're a guest in my home." "Of course I did." They ate in comfortable silence. The only sounds, the clink of forks on plates, and the occasional chirp of birds outside the window. Mason tried not to eat too fast, but he was hungrier than he'd realized. The food was simple, but perfectly cooked. Real food, home-cooked. Ethan watched him with something like satisfaction. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Mason paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "I honestly can't remember. A week, maybe?" Ethan frowned. "You've been living on what?" "Gas station food, when I could afford it. Sometimes I'd skip meals to save money." The admission hung between them. Ethan set down his fork, his expression serious. "Mason, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you in trouble? With the law? With someone?" "No," Mason said quickly. "Nothing like that. I needed to leave home, and I can't go back." "Why not?" Mason's hands clenched in his lap. "Because they don't want me there." "Who doesn't?" "My parents." Ethan's expression softened with understanding. "I see, do you?" Mason's voice was sharp, defensive. Then he deflated. "Sorry, it's complicated. It always is." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "But you're 18. Legally an adult? You should be able to go home if you want to." "They kicked me out," Mason said, the words bitter. 3 months ago. "Told me not to come back? Why?" Mason met his eyes, and Ethan saw the pain there. The shame. The fear, because I'm gay. The words dropped like stones into still water. Ethan's expression didn't change. Didn't flinch. Didn't harden. He simply nodded. "I see." Mason braced himself for rejection. For disgust. For being told to finish breakfast and leave? Instead, Ethan said, "That's a terrible reason to kick out your kid." Mason blinked. You're not bothered? By you being gay? "No. Why would I be?" "Most people are." "I'm not most people." Ethan took a sip of his coffee. "My uncle was gay. He and his partner, James, ran this ranch together for 20 years before James died. Uncle Robert raised me after that. Taught me that love is love, and anyone who says otherwise is a fool." Mason felt something crack open in his chest. I didn't expect that." "Expected me to throw you out?" Yeah, Ethan's eyes were kind. "Mason, I brought you inside last night because I saw a kid who needed help. Learning that you're gay doesn't change that. If anything, it makes me more determined to help you." "Why?" "Because I know what it's like. Not personally, I'm bisexual, and I was lucky enough to have an uncle who accepted me. But I've seen what rejection does. How it breaks people." Ethan leaned forward. "You're not broken, Mason. Your parents are wrong, and you deserve better." Mason's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink them back, but they spilled over anyway. "Sorry," he whispered, wiping at his face. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize for having feelings. It's just, no one said that to me. That I deserve better. Everyone back home, the church, my parents, my old friends, they all said I was wrong, sinful, that I chose this. You didn't choose anything except to be honest. That takes courage." Mason let out a shaky laugh. "Doesn't feel like courage. Feels like I ruined my life." "You didn't ruin anything. You're 18. Your life is just beginning. Doesn't feel like it." Ethan stood, crossing to the counter. He refilled both their coffee mugs, then sat back down. So he said, "Your plan. You were going to hitchhike to the next town, you said last night. Then what?" Mason shrugged. "Find work." "Any work?" "Save up enough to get my car fixed, then keep moving." "Moving where?" "I don't know. California, maybe. I heard it's more accepting there. Or Portland. Somewhere I can start over, and you think running west is going to fix things." Mason's jaw tightened. "What else am I supposed to do?" "Stop running, for one thing." "Easy for you to say." "You're right." It is easy for me to say, I had my uncle. I had this place. I had somewhere to belong. Ethan paused. But I also know what it's like to feel lost. To not know where you fit. And I know that running doesn't solve it. Eventually, you have to stop and build something. Build what? A life. A home. A future, Mason laughed bitterly. With what? I have $50 and a broken-down car. You have more than that. You've got determination, resilience. You walked 20 miles in a storm rather than give up. Fat lot of good it did me. It got you here, didn't it? Mason looked up, meeting Ethan's steady gaze. Look, Ethan said. I need help around here. Fences to mend, stalls to clean, hay to move, horses to train. It's hard work, but it's honest. I can pay you fair wages, plus room and board. Give you time to figure out your next move. Mason's eyes widened. You're offering me a job? For as long as you need it, or as long as you want to stay. Why? Mason asked, his voice barely a whisper. You don't know me. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when I was 19, I showed up here in the middle of the night. I'd just been kicked out of my apartment in Denver. Had nowhere to go. Uncle Robert took me in, gave me work, gave me a place to heal. He didn't have to, but he did. And it changed my life. So you're paying it forward? Something like that, Ethan smiled. Besides, I could use the help. And the company. Mason felt hope flicker in his chest, fragile and tentative. What if I mess up? What if I don't know what I'm doing? Then I'll teach you. That's what a good boss does, and I can really stay. In the house? You're already in the guest room. Might as well make it official. Mason's hands shook as he set down his coffee mug. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Yes, Mason whispered. Then, stronger. Yes, thank you. I won't let you down. Ethan extended his hand across the table. Welcome to Holloway Ranch. Mason. Mason shook his hand and felt, for the first time in 3 months, like maybe everything would be okay. The work began that afternoon. Ethan showed Mason around the property, pointing out the fence lines that needed mending. The hay barn, the stables where 6 horses lived, the chicken coop, the equipment shed. The ranch was bigger than Mason had realized. 200 acres of rolling grassland, backed by pine forests and mountains. It was beautiful in a wild, rugged way. How do you manage all this alone? Mason asked as they walked. Carefully, Ethan said with a wry smile, and with a lot of long days. Why do you think I'm so glad to have help? They spent the afternoon mending a section of fence that had been damaged in the storm. Ethan showed Mason how to measure and cut new boards, how to use the post hole digger, how to secure everything so it would last. It was hard, physical work. Mason's hands were soft, unused to labor. By the end of the first hour, he had blisters forming. Ethan noticed. Take a break. Don't push yourself too hard on day 1. I'm fine, Mason insisted, though his hands hurt. You're stubborn. Want to prove I can do this. Ethan's expression softened. You don't have to prove anything to me, but I admire the determination. They worked until sunset, the sky turning orange and pink and purple above the mountains. Mason was exhausted. His whole body ached. But it was a good ache, the ache of accomplishment. As they walked back to the house, tools in hand, Ethan said, You did good today. Really? Really? Most people would have quit after an hour. Mason smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time since he'd arrived. I don't quit easily. I'm starting to see that. He fell into a routine over the next few days. Wake at dawn. Feed the horses and chickens. Work on whatever needed doings, fences, stalls, equipment, maintenance. Break for lunch. More work in the afternoon. Evening chores. Dinner together. Then quiet evenings by the fire or on the porch. Mason learned quickly. He was a good listener, attentive, and eager to learn. And despite his initial clumsiness with ranch work, he improved every day. Ethan found himself looking forward to the mornings. To having someone to share coffee with. To teaching someone who actually wanted to learn. The house felt less empty with Mason in it. and Mason was starting to heal. The shadows under his eyes faded. His smiles came easier. He laughed more, his voice bright and young in a way that made Ethan's chest warm. They talked during their work, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. Ethan learned that Mason had grown up in a small town in Wyoming, that he'd been a good student planning to study engineering, that he'd come out to his best friend first, who had accepted him, but then word had spread. The church had gotten involved. His parents had been pressured, and everything had fallen apart. I thought if I told them I loved them, that I was still me, they'd understand, Mason said one afternoon as they mucked out stalls. But my dad wouldn't even look at me, and my mom just cried. Said I was breaking her heart? You weren't breaking anything, Ethan said firmly. They broke their own hearts by choosing prejudice over their son. Mason was quiet for a moment. Do you think they'll ever change their minds? I don't know. Some people do. Some don't. What if they don't? Then that's their loss, not yours. Mason nodded, but Ethan could see the hurt lingering, and Ethan shared his own story. About growing up in Denver, about realizing he was attracted to both men and women in high school, about dating a guy his senior year and being outed by a classmate, about his parents' disappointment, though they'd never kicked him out, about leaving Denver at 19 anyway, unable to bear the weight of their quiet disapproval. Well, Robert saved me, Ethan said. He told me there was nothing wrong with me. That love in any form was a gift. He made me believe it. He sounds like a good man. The best. I wish I'd had someone like that. Ethan met Mason's eyes. You've got someone like that now. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. 3 weeks passed. Mason's hands grew calloused. His body grew stronger. He learned to read the horse's moods, to fix a stubborn gait, to predict the weather by the way the wind shifted. He felt useful, needed, valued, and something else was happening too. Something he wasn't quite ready to name. He was falling for Ethan. It happened in small moments. The way Ethan's eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he spoke gently to the horses. The way he patiently taught Mason, never making him feel stupid or inadequate. The way he looked at sunset, silhouetted against the mountains, strong and steady and real. Mason tried to ignore it. Tried to tell himself it was just gratitude, just loneliness. But he knew better. He was falling in love with the cowboy who'd refused to let him sleep in the barn. Ethan was having the same realization, and it terrified him. He'd sworn off relationships years ago, after his last boyfriend, Marcus, had left him for someone younger, more exciting. Ethan had decided it was easier to be alone. The ranch didn't require emotional vulnerability. Horses didn't break your heart, but Mason was different. Mason made him want to try again. Made him want to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have something real. But Mason was also 18, fresh out of a traumatic situation, vulnerable, working for Ethan, living in his house. There was a power imbalance, and Ethan was keenly aware of it. He wouldn't take advantage of that, no matter how he felt, so he kept his distance, kept things professional, friendly, safe, even as his heart betrayed him every time Mason smiled. The turning point came on a Saturday night in late summer. They'd spent the day hauling hay. Hot and exhausting work under the August sun. By evening, they were both drenched in sweat and covered in dust. We've earned a break, Ethan declared. How about steaks on the grill? Mason grinned. Sounds perfect. They showered and changed, then reconvened on the back porch. Ethan fired up the grill while Mason brought out plates. Corn on the cob, salad, the sun set in shades of fire. Crickets sang in the grass. Fireflies danced in the gathering dusk. Mason felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. Can I ask you something? He said, his voice soft. Shoot. Why did you really let me stay? That first night, Ethan was quiet for a long moment, focusing on flipping the steaks. Then he set down the tongs and met Mason's eyes. Because I saw myself in you. A kid who needed a break. A chance. He hesitated. And because I was lonely? I didn't realize how lonely until you showed up. Mason's breath caught. I'm still lonely sometimes, Ethan continued, but less so now. You've brought something back to this place, something I didn't know was missing. Laughter, life, hope. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Ethan, Mason whispered. Aye, but before he could finish, Ethan stood abruptly, his movements jerky. Steaks are done. We should eat before they get cold. He turned away, busying himself with the food. Putting distance between them, Mason sat frozen, his heart pounding. The words he'd been about to say caught in his throat. They ate in tense silence. The easy companionship from earlier evaporated. Mason pushed food around his plate. His appetite gone, Ethan ate mechanically, his jaw tight. Finally, Mason couldn't take it anymore. Did I say something wrong? No. Then why? Because I'm trying to do the right thing, Ethan said, his voice rough. He set down his fork. Mason, you're 18. You work for me? You're living in my house. There's a power imbalance here, and I stop, Mason said firmly. He set down his own fork and leaned forward. I'm not a kid, Ethan, and I know what I feel. Mason, you feel it too. I know you do. Ethan's jaw clenched. It doesn't matter what I feel. I won't take advantage of you. You're not, Mason insisted, his voice rising. Ethan, you've given me more in these weeks than anyone has in years. You've shown me kindness, respect, trust. You've made me feel seen, valued, safe, and his voice cracked. I think I'm falling for you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Ethan's expression crumbled. Christ, Mason. Tell me you don't feel the same, Mason challenged, his heart racing. Tell me, and I'll drop it. I'll stay as your ranch hand and nothing more. But if you do feel something, if there's any chance, Ethan stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Of course I feel something, he said, his voice low and raw. I've been trying not to, trying to keep my distance, because you deserve better than some broken-down cowboy 16 years older than you. You deserve someone who— I don't want someone else, Mason interrupted. He stood, crossing to stand beside Ethan. I want you. Ethan turned to look at him, and Mason saw the conflict in his eyes. The fear, the longing. I'm scared, Ethan admitted. Scared of hurting you? Scared of this blowing up? Scared of— Mason reached out, tentatively touching Ethan's hand on the railing. I'm scared too, he said softly. But I'm more scared of not trying, of walking away without knowing what this could be. Ethan looked down at their hands. So close, but not quite touching. Then he closed the distance. His fingers intertwined with Mason's, rough and warm and real. We do this right, he murmured. No rushing. No pressure. We figure this out together, at your pace. And if at any point you want to stop, we stop. No questions asked. Mason smiled, his eyes bright with tears and hope. Together, Ethan agreed. And there, on the porch under the stars, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, they took the first step into something new, something terrifying and beautiful and real. Their first kiss happened 2 days later. They were in the barn, grooming the horses in the soft light of late afternoon. Mason was brushing down Daisy, a gentle mare with a white star on her forehead, when he looked up and found Ethan watching him. Mason asked, smiling. Nothing, just you're good with her. She's sweet. Ethan crossed the stable, stopping just in front of Mason, close enough that Mason could smell leather and hay and something uniquely Ethan. Mason, Ethan said softly, can I kiss you? Mason's heart stuttered. Yes. Ethan reached up, cupping Mason's face with one calloused hand. His thumb brushed across Mason's cheekbone. It's gentle and reverent. Then he leaned in. The kiss was soft, tentative. A question and an answer all at once. Mason's eyes fluttered closed. His hands came up to rest on Ethan's chest, feeling the steady thud of his heartbeat. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against Mason's. Okay? He murmured. More than okay, Mason whispered. They stood there for a long moment, just breathing each other in, the horses shuffling softly in their stalls around them, and Mason thought, this is what coming home feels like. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Mason's life. They took things slow, learning each other in quiet moments. A hand held across the dinner table, a kiss stolen in the early morning light, falling asleep on the couch together, the TV playing softly in the background. Ethan was gentle, patient, always checking in, making sure Mason felt safe, respected, wanted, and Mason blossomed under that care. He laughed more, smiled easier. The shadows in his eyes began to fade, replaced by light. They worked the ranch together during the day, their movements synchronizing, learning each other's rhythms, and at night, they'd sit on the porch talking about everything and nothing, their pasts, their dreams, their fears. What do you want? Ethan asked one night, stars wheeling overhead. Long term, I mean? Mason was quiet, thinking. I want to finish school. Go to college, maybe. Study veterinary medicine. Yeah, working with the horses. I love it. I want to do more of that, Ethan smiled. You'd be good at it. What about you? What do you want? Ethan looked out at his land, at the dark shapes of the mountains against the sky. The ranch. But not alone anymore. I've realized I don't want to do this alone. He glanced at Mason, and there was such vulnerability in his eyes that Mason's breath caught. I want this, Ethan continued. With you, if you want it to. Mason reached for his hand. I want it to. Even though I'm older. Even though I'm just a rancher with dirt under his nails. Especially because of that, Mason said fiercely. Ethan, you're the most amazing person I've ever met. You're kind and patient and strong. You saved my life. I just gave you a place to stay. Gave me so much more than that. You gave me hope, future, a reason to believe in myself again. Ethan pulled Mason closer, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. You gave me the same things, you know. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone to share this with, to have someone who saw me. They sat together, wrapped in each other's warmth, and watched the stars wheel overhead, and Mason thought about that rain-soaked night 3 months ago, about how scared he'd been, how lost, about how asking one simple question, can I sleep in your barn, had changed everything. But not everything was easy. Mason still had nightmares sometimes. Dreams where his father found him, dragged him back, locked him away. Dreams where Ethan disappeared, leaving him alone again. He'd wake gasping, heart racing, and Ethan would be there, holding him, soothing him, reminding him he was safe. I've got you, Ethan would murmur. You're not alone. I'm right here. Slowly, the nightmares came less frequently. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color. Mason's car had been towed to town and fixed. It sat in the driveway now, ready to go whenever he wanted. But Mason didn't want to leave. He'd found something here. Something precious and rare. A home. A purpose. A love that felt like it could last. One evening, as they cooked dinner together in the kitchen, Ethan said, I've been thinking about you going back to school? You said you wanted to study veterinary medicine. Mason paused in chopping vegetables. Yeah, someday. What if someday was sooner? There's a community college in town. They have online classes too. You could start in the spring semester. Mason turned to look at him. Ethan, I can't afford, I'll help. Call it part of your salary. Investment in your future? That's too much. It's not. Mason, you're brilliant. You shouldn't give up on your education because of what your parents did. Let me help you. Mason's eyes filled with tears. Why do you keep doing this? Keep giving me things? Ethan crossed to him, taking his hands. Because I believe in you. Because you deserve every opportunity. And because... He hesitated. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Mason's breath caught. You love me. I do. I know it's fast. I know we said we'd take things slow. But I can't help how I feel. And I understand if you're not ready to say it back. I love you too. Mason interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. God, Ethan, I love you so much, it scares me. Ethan pulled him into his arms, holding him tight. Don't be scared. I've got you. They stood there in the kitchen, dinner forgotten, just holding each other, and Mason felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Belonging, but challenges remained. Mason's parents eventually tracked him down through his abandoned car's registration. They sent letters, demanding he come home, telling him he was making a mistake, that he was living in sin. Mason read the letters with Ethan beside him, his hands shaking. They want me to come back, he said, to go to conversion therapy. To fix myself. Ethan's jaw clenched. You're not broken. There's nothing to fix. I know, but they're my parents. Part of me still wants them to accept me. No. And that's natural. But acceptance that comes with conditions isn't real acceptance. Mason nodded, tears streaming down his face. I can't go back. I won't. You don't have to. This is your home now. For as long as you want it. Mason wrote back to his parents. A single letter, carefully composed, telling them he loved them but couldn't accept their conditions. That he was happy and safe. That he hoped someday they'd understand. He sent it with shaking hands. The response came 2 weeks later. A letter from his father, cold and final, disowning him completely. Mason cried in Ethan's arms that night, grieving the family he'd lost. But he also realized something. Family wasn't just blood. It was the people who chose to stand by you, who loved you for who you were, not who they wanted you to be. And he had Ethan. He had Blue, who followed him everywhere. He had the horses who nickered when they saw him coming. He had a found family. And that was enough. October brought the first snow to the mountains. Mason enrolled in online classes, starting his journey toward a degree in veterinary science. He studied in the evenings, books spread across the kitchen table. While Ethan worked on ranch accounts beside him, they built a life together. Routine and quiet and filled with small moments of joy. Morning coffee on the porch. Watching the sun rise. Working side by side, their hands occasionally brushing. Cooking dinner together, dancing to old country songs, playing on the radio. Falling asleep tangled together, safe and warm. It wasn't always easy. They had disagreements. Moments of frustration. Times when Ethan's fear of losing Mason made him overprotective. Or when Mason's insecurities made him push Ethan away. But they always talked it through. Always came back to each other. Because this was real. This was worth fighting for. November arrived, and with it, the anniversary of Mason's arrival. 1 year since that rain-soaked night. Since Mason had stumbled up to the barn, desperate and alone. Ethan woke Mason early that morning with coffee and a kiss. Happy anniversary, he murmured. Mason smiled sleepily. Anniversary. 1 year since you asked to sleep in my barn? Mason laughed, pulling Ethan back into bed. Best question I ever asked? Best answer I ever gave? They lay tangled together, the morning light soft through the curtains. I have something for you, Ethan said. He reached into the nightstand, pulling out a small box. Mason's eyes widened. Ethan, it's not what you think. Not yet, anyway. Ethan opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring. It's a promise ring. A promise that I'm in this for the long haul. That I'm not going anywhere. And that when you're ready, when we're both ready, I'll ask you properly. Mason's eyes filled with tears. Ethan, will you wear it? Yes. God, yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto Mason's finger, then kissed his hand. I love you, Ethan whispered. I love you too. They spent the day working the ranch together. Mason constantly glancing at the ring on his finger, smiling. That evening, they threw a small celebration. Just the two of them, steaks on the grill, wine, and the first stars appearing overhead. Remember when I asked to sleep in your barn? Mason said, leaning against Ethan's shoulder.
How could I forget?
What made you refuse? Really? Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. I think I saw the person you could become. Not the scared kid standing in the rain, but the strong, capable, beautiful person underneath. And I couldn't let you sleep in the cold when I had warmth to offer. You saw all that in one glance? I saw potential. Hope. Someone worth taking a chance on. Ethan kissed the top of Mason's head. And I was right. Mason smiled. I was so scared that night. So was I scared of letting someone in? Scared of getting hurt again? You made it worth the risk. I'm glad you refused. If you'd let me sleep in the barn, I probably would have left the next morning. And I never would have known what I was missing. Both would have missed out. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Ethan, Mason said softly. Yeah. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For giving me a home when I had nowhere to go. For loving me when I didn't think I was worth loving. Ethan turned to face him, his eyes serious. Mason, you've always been worth loving. Your parents were wrong. And I'm grateful every day that the universe brought you to my door. Me too. They kissed under the stars. And Mason felt, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly home. The ranch had always been a place of healing for Ethan. His uncle had taught him that. Had shown him that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was give them a chance to start over. To rebuild, to become who they were meant to be. And now, years after his uncle had passed, Ethan was continuing that legacy, giving Mason that chance, that grace, that unconditional love. And in return, Mason had given him something precious beyond measure, companionship, joy, a reason to believe in the possibility of love again, a reason to wake up smiling. Their story wasn't about a cowboy rescuing a lost teen. It was about two people finding each other at exactly the right moment, about kindness rippling forward through generations, about choosing to open your door and your heart when it would have been easier to turn away. It was about asking for help when you needed it most, and about saying yes when someone needed you. It was about refusing to let someone sleep in the cold when you had warmth to offer, and it was about building a life, brick by brick, moment by moment, together. Spring came to the ranch, bringing wildflowers and new foals. Mason was finishing his first year of college with straight A's. He'd been offered an internship at the local veterinary clinic for the summer. Ethan had expanded the ranch, taking on 3 new horses and planning to start offering trail rides to tourists. And together, they'd built something beautiful. A partnership, a home, a love that deepened with each passing day. One evening in May, as they stood watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Mason said, I can't imagine being anywhere else. No, this is home. You're home. Ethan pulled him close. You know, when you showed up that night, I thought you'd stay a few days and then leave. I never imagined what. That you'd become my whole world. Mason turned in his arms, looking up at him. I could say the same about you. What do you say we make this permanent? Ethan asked. Move out of the guest room. Your room now is just down the hall from mine. What if we shared a room? Made this official? Mason grinned. I thought you'd never ask. Is that a yes? That's a hell yes. They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, Blue barking happily at their feet, and Mason thought about that rain-soaked night almost 18 months ago, about how scared he'd been, how lost, how certain that his life was over. He'd asked one simple question, Can I sleep in your barn? And Ethan had said no. Thank God he'd said no, because that refusal, that choice to bring Mason inside, to offer warmth and safety, and eventually love had changed both their lives forever. It had been the beginning of everything, a gay love story, a heartfelt romance, an emotional journey from loneliness to belonging, from fear to courage, from running to choosing to stay. This LGBTQ love story proved that sometimes the most important moments in life came from unexpected kindness, from strangers who became family, from taking a chance on someone when you didn't have to, from refusing to let someone suffer in the cold when you had warmth to offer. Mason had found his home, his purpose, his person, and Ethan had found the same. 2 hearts, once broken and lost, now whole and found, all because one cowboy had refused to let a scared teen sleep in his barn, all because one teen had been brave enough to ask for help, all because love, in its purest form, was about showing up for each other. Day after day, moment by moment, through rain and sunshine, fear and joy, uncertainty and hope, this was their story. A story of healing and second chances, of found family and chosen love. And it was only just beginning, should their story continue. Comment part 2 if you want more. Like if this made your heart race, subscribe for weekly gay romance stories.